I honestly don't understand. I don't understand why it's controversial to anybody to decide that you're going to stand with Israel in this situation. I honestly don't understand why it's controversial to say we need a secure border. I've been very clear. In fact, that was weaponized against me as Republicans in my race, that I'm very much a strong supporter of immigration. And, you know, my wife's family, that's the Oregon story about that. And I think
Oh
two
my
things can be
gosh.
true at the
He
same
had a
time.
stroke and he sounds more sensible than anybody else in his party on these issues. I Again, he gets a hoodie pass from me now, and I don't care if he wears shorts. He I can't even believe these words. He gets it. It's so weird to say this, Kane. It's so weird. I feel like maybe Stephen Yates' jet lag is rubbing off on us right now because none of this makes sense. You guys know our very good friend Stephen Yates. He's been all over the world. He's been on multiple continents, just traversing the seven seas. He's been everywhere. And you know, he is the senior fellow at America First Policy Institute as well, and the chair of the China Policy Initiative. He was in Taiwan. He was in Hungary. He's been everywhere. But before we do anything, Stephen, I got to ask you. He's right, Fetterman, about the border. He has said over and over again it has to be secured. He's talked about the drugs coming across the border. He's mentioned fentanyl. He's even, I can't even believe I'm saying this, he even brought up once China and their involvement in all the raw materials going into making opioids that have been flowing across the border. Your initial response on this? I can't believe I'm giving him accolades here.
Well, this would be worthy of an investigative journalism piece to go into what exactly happened, because there was none of this sense during the campaign. And I don't even remember this time in the campaign where he says he was attacked on these things, because during the campaign, it was pretty cookie cutter, far left stuff that was carrying him across the finish line. But whatever the transfusion was, it used to be the Saturday Night Live routine where they joked about taking all the blood out and replacing it with Folgers crystals. Something got into Fetterman, and some common sense is coming out, and it's blowing my mind too.
It's and it is bringing, I think, more. It's amplifying, I think, the existing limited but existing concern that Democrats, maybe some Democrat leaning independents, et cetera, have about the border. Because when you see this stuff, I mean, you hear from Border Patrol that, yeah, while they're distracting Border Patrol with a group of like 100 illegal entrants coming across at this portion, here they're getting major shipments of fentanyl that they're bringing across, you know, in another point.
Yeah.
And this is such a driver. And the Chinese involvement in this. Talk for a minute about your understanding of how deep they are into this, because the raw materials, the things that the cartels are using to manufacture this, it's coming from overseas. It's coming from China.
Yeah, well, the fancy term for the chemical inputs for this is precursors. And so it's basically the ingredients before you put everything together and stamp it into a pill or put it into a liquid form. And so the manufacturers in China, many of them are state-owned enterprises. So, I mean, obviously, the Chinese government and the Communist Party knows who's doing what with whom. I mean, after all, they have no ethics or privacy, and they have the world's most advanced technological surveillance state. So they know who's doing what with whom. But the Chinese involvement isn't just limited to getting these precursors into the cartel's hands. They're also their source of money laundering. They took it away from Middle East sources, and they have finding ways to get hard currency out of China because they know their economy is not so good, and they're kind of not happy with their government, and they're driving a massive shift in the money laundering business. And last but not least, they're moving people. And so they're bringing business to the cartel. So just like our universities got high on the sugar of full paid tuition from international students from China, the cartels and the human trafficking pipelines are getting paid upfront mules going in that are Chinese, going into Ecuador or Panama and coming up through that trail of tears across our border. And it's either military-aged males who are going to do we don't know what, or they're feeding the human trafficking or what have you. And it's all basically a network of evil. And as you know, I feel particularly stung by what this brings into our country. It's the greatest attack on the American family in the history of our republic. And it's about darn time that more than just the sweatshirt senator from Pennsylvania starts talking about this and doing something about it.
Yeah, no, I think and these are all great points. Talking to our friend Stephen Yates, you can find him on X at YatesComs as well. You were traveling to Taiwan. I was reading this, or you just got back from traveling to Taiwan. You've been to a lot of places. I was reading this morning that it was looking at a survey of, I guess, I don't know how much stock to put in some of these experts, but they were looking at whether or not these experts believed that China could actually invade Taiwan, and what Axios ended up reporting is that, well, definitely a blockade of the island for sure, but they're not at a point where they can in any time soon conduct an invasion of Taiwan. A blockade of Taiwan, though, I mean, I don't know how they could conduct something like that without it affecting like the entire world's shipping and distribution, etc.
Yeah, this is my frustration with war games. They tend to be conducted by egghead professors who don't really know where the trenches are in the ocean, and that if you're going to have a blockade of Taiwan, it's almost logistically impossible to do so without encroaching on Japanese maritime space and Philippine maritime space. And both of those countries have been stung with really aggressive campaigns by China's civil vessels and also their Coast Guard vessels. The Filipinos were blasted with water cannons. The Japanese, on a daily basis, face these kinds of harassment and encroachment campaigns. Those trigger in treaty alliances the United States doesn't have any choice but to honor if we're going to have any alliances at all. And so it is hard for China to really be able to pull this off. But if you have kind of a permissive environment with a distracted or inept Washington, you have big conflicts going on in other parts of the world, you have overwhelming economic and supply chain dependence on China, they're not that crazy to think that they might be able to pull this kind of thing off, even if I might say it's harder than it looks. So we're in a zone of danger that way. People in Taiwan feel it and don't feel it. They've lived with this for so long that there's an unreality to it. They know there's no real reason for them to be attacked. I mean, they're just going about their business. They're a threat to no one.
Yeah.
But the reality is Xi Jinping and under his leadership in China, they're not rational. They didn't have to stomp on Hong Kong. They don't have to be picking fights with the United States. Our elites were willing to give them everything and more if they just played nice. And they chose not to play nice. So we're dealing in this uncertainty, and it's not a happy situation.
Switching gears, still focusing on China, but kind of looking a little bit more domestically, particularly with the general election coming up and the primary dwindling down. What footing or message on China should a Republican candidate have going into the election?
Well, I put it this way. Anyone, Democrat, Independent, or Republican, they really ought to start with, even though it sounds like a slogan for one candidate, America first. But I mean, we have to make ourselves more self-reliant and sustainable and resilient. We cannot have these unbalanced trade relationships. We cannot have dependencies in areas that are vital to our way of life, whether it's food, technology, energy, go down the list. And there are pieces of this that used to be what the Democrats talked about, and you'd think that an RFK Jr. or someone else would be able to wake up the Democrats on that side. And that Republicans, I think, have been mugged by reality that the doctrine of free trade just isn't the real world today. And we're going to have to safe shore and have more manufacturing done in our hemisphere and in our homeland. If we're going to be able to sustain our way of life, we're going to have to kick out malign influences away from our energy grid. I mean, you're in the great state, former Republic of Texas, and the Chinese have some toeholds there that could have undue influence. We just have to do a lot of this from the ground up.
Yeah.
The rest can take care of itself, but we all have to do that. And I think the American people are right there for that.
I was talking with our friend Stephen Yates at YatesComs on X. I was talking with a friend who does business all over the world, and was saying that one of the things that she believes is just absent from especially any kind of economic, any kind of type of foreign policies that relates to China is the patent issue. And how China is, I was looking at the numbers. I mean, the surge, and I understand that China will steal things and refile, but they're dominating with tech, with patents. I'd like 3-1 with that of the United States. And they became, according to the World Intellectual Property Organization, just several years ago, they took #1 in the world as the top filer for international patents. This is a major danger, especially rolling towards, everything becoming more digital, rolling towards, the chips that we all need to power all the stuff that we want to power, and we don't have any self-sustaining capabilities to do that here. Talk a little bit about that, because I thought that was incredibly insightful, and I knew that they were outpacing the U.S., but I was actually shocked by the amount.
Well, there's sort of substance, and then there's the lawfare angle of it that really matters. I mean, it is critical that we stay ahead on innovation, and the best way to do that is to respect free speech and to respect free markets and kind of keep those foundational things that did more to bring wealth, freedom, and security to the world than any era in human history ever did. And don't be shy or apologetic about it. Got to stand on those things. Now, the other thing is, China is the world's leading violator on intellectual property. There's a real question to be made whether we're going to have institutions that say, if you're the biggest violator on human rights, you're not on the Human Rights Commission. If you're the biggest violator on intellectual property, you don't get to file all of these patent applications. I mean, you have to obey and abide by and respect the rules if you're going to get the benefit of those protections. And we just have to have the brains and the cojones to stand up and hold firm on that. And that's shockingly to, I think, most sensible Americans, not where our policy has been. And so just doing that simple stuff would do an immense amount to level this playing field. But we just have to do more here. We've got to get out of our own way here. We've got to get those silly regulations out of the way so that we get what the creator gave us, process it here, don't send it to China, and just a lot of that can organically put us in a much safer position.
Amen to that. Stephen Yates at Yates Comms. Always love talking with you. And I know these issues are just going to heat up even more as we roll towards November, and all these other world leaders and tyrants start getting a little nervous as they see what's to come. So we'll have a lot more to talk about in the weeks coming. We're glad that you traveled safely. Good to see you.
Thanks so much, Dana. Take care.
You too.